They say the desert is honest. It doesn't pretend to give what it can't. And in 1881, the New Mexico Territory had already made one thing clear. No one's safe when a man's pride is bruised and his pockets are empty. May Ward stood in the back of a half-rotted chapel, her shoes dusty, her eyes quiet. Outside, the sky bled rust, and the wind dragged grit across broken gravestones. Inside, her father, Reverend Silas Ward, was sipping from a tin flask, his sermon book left unopened on the altar. The only prayer on his lips tonight was one he didn't say aloud. He needed a miracle, or a loan. That's when Boone Caro entered. Black coat, gold watch, silver tongue. He called himself a railroad man, but everyone in Sable Creek knew he was more outlaw than entrepreneur. 6 armed men flanked him, lean and hollow-eyed. They looked like wolves in Sunday hats. Reverend Ward shook Caro's hand like it was a baptism. "I don't want blood, preacher, just payment," Caro said, sliding a folded note across the wooden pew. "And obedience can be bought cheaper than gold." May stood still. Her father didn't look back at her. That hurt more than the deal itself. She wasn't even consulted, just included. A preacher's daughter pawned off like a worn hymn book. "I raised her right. She'll make a good housewife," Silas mumbled, voice thick with shame and whiskey. Quiet, God-fearing. But May had never been either of those things. Not really. That night, the air inside the chapel felt thick and strange, like even God had left. As the sun sank behind the canyon, May slipped into the vestry and took one last look at the place where she'd been baptized, lied to, and finally sold. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just left. A sack of biscuits, a half-full canteen, and around her neck, a small pendant her mother had given her before dying of fever. The carving of a feather, smoothed by years of her touch. It wasn't valuable to anyone but May, but she clutched it like a key to another life. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that she wouldn't stay in a town that sold daughters like cattle at auction. And behind her, while candles still flickered at the altar, Silas Ward raised his flask and told himself it was the only way. But the desert was already watching, and it remembers when men sell what they should have protected. The first thing May noticed after leaving town was how quiet the land could be when no one was pretending to be holy. The moon hung low, blood-colored just above the distant line of the Sierra Oscura. Every thorn bush looked like a threat, every gust of wind like a whisper of regret. The landscape wasn't offering safety, it was daring her to survive. The path she took was little more than a deer trail, long abandoned by wagons and reason. Her shoes blistered her heels, her lips cracked from the wind. But every step forward was a step away from ownership. She thought she'd have more time. She didn't. Caro sent a tracker, Amos Vex. There weren't many men like Amos left. He was a war relic, half scars, half shadow. Some said he'd fought at Shiloh, others at Gettysburg, but what they all agreed on was this: he never missed. Not with a bullet, not with a target, and certainly not when there was a reward. May didn't hear him at first, but she felt it, that uneasy prickle down her spine, the kind of feeling you get when a rattler's coiled nearby, silent and ready. Somewhere behind her, Amos was moving fast. He rode without lantern or words. His one good eye scanned every broken branch, every boot print, and he was gaining. May stumbled down a dry wash, hands raw from grabbing at sandstone for balance. She could barely catch her breath, but she didn't stop. Fear is like fire. It burns until it becomes momentum. She reached the riverbed, what was once a river anyway. Now it was just memory and sand. She knelt, dug with trembling hands, and found just enough wet clay to smear across her forehead. Her mother used to say clay cooled the fear. Maybe it was true. Maybe it was just something to believe in. She kept running, into the dark, into whatever waited. Her vision blurred. Her foot caught a rock. Then everything tilted and the stars swam above her like ghosts. She didn't hear Amos dismount, didn't see him check her tracks. But in the last moment, before everything went black, she saw something else. A figure, not Amos, not Boone, not anyone she recognized. He didn't speak, didn't raise a weapon. He just knelt beside her, brushed a strand of dust-caked hair from her cheek, and touched the feather pendant around her neck. And the desert, which had once dared her to survive, paused to listen, because something ancient had just changed. The man who found May wasn't hunting trouble. He was hunting deer. That morning he'd tracked hoofprints from the high ridge, down to the edge of the dry river, hoping to bring meat back to his people before the sky turned violent again. His name was Sani. To the Comanche, it meant the second son. But to most who knew him, he was simply the hunter who didn't miss and never struck first. His silence was the kind that made others sit straighter, not out of fear, but respect. When he saw her, the pale woman crumpled beneath a juniper tree, he didn't move right away. She looked dead. Blood at her temple, dirt on her hands. But then a flicker. Her fingers twitched, clutching something against her chest. It glinted, a feather pendant carved in the old rainbird design. Sani's breath caught. He had seen that pattern only once since his sister Tahea was taken in a settler raid 5 years ago. The carving was hers, passed from grandmother to granddaughter, lost in fire and screams. He had made peace with never seeing it again, and yet, here it was, around the neck of a stranger. He didn't draw his blade, didn't speak. He just watched her shallow breathing, then slowly lifted her into his arms. She weighed little, lighter than the deer he hunted, but heavier than memory. His horse waited in the shade. He placed her across its back and rode slow, not back to the hunt, but to the lodge of Nakai, the village healer, the only one who still listened to the winds and read the sky like a story. Sani said nothing when he arrived, just carried the girl into the roundhouse and laid her gently beside the fire. "Who is she?" Nakai asked. He only answered with a whisper, "She carries Tahea's feather." Nakai's eyes narrowed. She felt the pendant. It was real, old, honest. Then she looked at May. "This one's got wounds deeper than the skin," she murmured, "but she's still breathing. That means something." Sani didn't nod. He didn't need to. He had seen enough of life to know that the desert rarely returns what it takes. But this time, maybe it did. May woke to the scent of smoke and cedar, her eyes blinking against filtered light streaming through stretched animal hide. For a moment she thought she was back in the chapel. The roof felt curved like a dome, the silence too pure to trust. But when she moved, pain shouted through her ribs, and reality followed like a shadow. She wasn't home, she wasn't in chains, and she wasn't alone. An old woman sat beside her, grinding herbs in a shallow bowl. Her hair was silver, braided with bits of shell and fur. Her eyes, though clouded by age, held a sharpness that cut right through silence. "Don't sit up yet," she said without looking. "Your body's still choosing whether it forgives you." May's throat was parched. Her voice cracked. "Where am I?" "Not where you were. That's all that matters." The woman smiled without warmth. "Drink." She held out a ladle made from a gourd. May took it, sipped. Bitter, smoky, strange. But it cleared her head. Footsteps outside made her flinch. The flap of the lodge lifted, and the man who had found her, Sani, stepped in. He didn't speak, just stood there, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. May sat up a little straighter. "I owe you. I don't have money, but—" Her voice trembled. "If you want payment, I'll do what I have to." The silence in the room snapped like a twig. Nakai looked at her as if she'd just spit on the floor. Gratitude is not flesh, she said sharply. Your body is not coin, not here. May's face flushed with shame, but the old woman's voice softened. Work mends debt, truth mends spirit. That's the only trade we make here. Sani turned and walked out without a word. May's hands shook. He's not angry, Nakai said, just thinking. About what? Why the feather you carry belonged to his dead sister. May stared down at the pendant. She didn't have answers. Only stories her mother whispered late at night. Tales of stolen things, of a child's keepsake found in a prairie churchyard. Until now, she never questioned it. In the days that followed, she stayed in the village. Too weak to walk far, she learned to sew hides and grind corn with the younger children. That's when the twins came. Kaya and Eno, mischievous, fast-talking siblings who clung to her like burrs. They were orphans, wild and bright-eyed. They taught her Comanche words by tricking her into saying rude things and then collapsing with laughter when she realized. It was irritating. It was beautiful. It was the first time in years she felt seen. And for the first time in a long, long while, May laughed. Not politely, not in disguise. A real, ugly, hiccuping laugh that startled even her. Because somehow, in a place where she expected to pay for her safety with her soul, she was being taught that healing didn't require debt. Only honesty. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and restless, the kind of sound that didn't announce a storm. It warned of one. May sat by the edge of the village, helping Eno stitch beads onto a pouch, when Nakai appeared, cloak pulled tight against the rising wind. The elder's face was still, but her eyes were watching the sky like it was speaking a secret. They say you carry a prophecy, she said to May. May frowned. I carry thread and bruises. Nakai reached down and tapped the pendant at her chest. Number, you carry this. She motioned for May to follow. They entered the ceremonial lodge where a large clay vessel rested in the center, its rim painted with feathers, water lines, and storms. Nakai began to chant, not loudly, but like someone recalling a memory. Her fingers traced the rainbird carved onto May's pendant. The prophecy was simple, she said. When the rainbird feather returns, the valley will drink again. May stared at the carving, heartbeat stumbling. I don't understand. Few do. That's how truth survives. It hides in things we don't question until it's too late. Outside, the wind shifted, pulling dust into the air like a rising curtain. For the first time in many seasons, clouds began to gather over the Sierra. Elsewhere, a man watched from a ridge. Amos Vex hadn't given up the hunt, but something about this job had started to rot in his gut. He'd tracked the girl here easily enough, her trail sloppy from injury and panic. But what he saw at the edge of the Comanche camp didn't match the story Boone Caro had sold him. Children playing, elders tending fire, laughter, the kind of warmth that couldn't be faked. Vex hadn't grown soft over the years, but something in him paused. He reached into his coat and pulled out a scrap of paper, a letter, not to anyone in particular, just words he needed to say before pulling the trigger. I was told these were killers, he wrote, but I see family, I see truth, and I no longer know what side I'm on. He folded the note and tucked it inside his saddlebag, because he knew one thing. When the wind changes in New Mexico, so do allegiances. And somewhere inside him, a war veteran turned mercenary was starting to wonder if this time, maybe he wasn't the hunter anymore. Maybe he was the warning. The desert went quiet before the sound of hooves shattered it. May was tending a fire with Kaya and Eno when the horses crested the ridge. 6 men, all armed, all stiff-backed and watchful. Behind them rode Boone Caro, cloaked in arrogance and smelling of cigars and conquest. His face, ruddy and sunburnt, was half smile, half threat, but it was what dangled from his saddle horn that made May's stomach twist. A child, Kaya. A rope looped loosely around her wrists. She was unharmed, but her tears ran silent. May stood frozen, not from fear, but fury. Sani stepped up beside her, hand on the hilt of his knife. Around them, Comanche warriors emerged from shadows, bows drawn, carbines loaded, eyes sharp. The children were ushered back. Nakai murmured a prayer behind May. The wind had changed again. Boone dismounted with the ease of a man who thought he couldn't be touched. "Evenin'," he said, tipping his hat like he was addressing church folk. "I've come for what's mine." Sani stepped forward. "No one here is yours." Caro's eyes flicked to May. "She is," he said, voice like gravel in whiskey. "And if she isn't handed over by sunset, this little one rides with me back to the rail line. They'll pay just fine for a wild child to parade around the city." May's breath caught. Her hands curled into fists. "You think I'd go with you?" she said. "Just because you dragged a child into your mess?" Caro sneered. "I think you still care about people, and that makes you weak." The village tensed. Warriors closed in. One wrong move and the dust would turn to blood. But May spoke again, this time to Sani. "Let me trade myself, not for real, just long enough." He looked at her like she'd said something insane, but she kept going. "If I pretend to surrender, we can use it. Use me. You slip in, free Kaya and Amos. He's still out there. Maybe he hasn't made his choice yet." Sani's jaw clenched. He hated it, every part of it. But he nodded. Nakai laid a hand on May's shoulder. "You understand what you're risking?" "I've already been sold once," she whispered. "But this time, I get to decide the price." As dusk approached, May wrapped thin rope around her wrists, just tight enough to look real, loose enough to break when needed. She dusted her face, cut her palm slightly, and covered herself in the mask of defeat. Caro was waiting, smug as ever, as she stepped forward, the child behind him crying quietly. He grinned. "That's better," he said. "Obedience. It suits you." But he didn't see the look in her eyes. This wasn't surrender, it was strategy, and by sundown the desert would remember her name. The canyon was deathly quiet when the exchange began. Boone Caro's camp was nestled in the hollow of Palo Duro Gorge, flanked by rocky ledges and sun-scorched brush. Tents had been pitched, rifles propped, and whiskey passed around like truth didn't matter anymore. The men guarding the perimeter weren't nervous. They should have been. May walked in, barefoot, shackles rattling gently. She kept her head down, her eyes trained on the dust, her mind racing with every silent signal she'd planned with Sani. The rope on her wrists looked solid, but it had been soaked and sun-dried to snap on command. Her palms still bled, but not from surrender, from sacrifice. Caro watched her arrive with the hunger of a man who never earned anything but took everything. He sat on a crate, legs wide, gun in his lap. "You've got guts," he said. "I'll give you that." She didn't answer. He stood, reached for her face. But in that moment, a hawk cry echoed across the gorge. Sani moved like smoke, cutting through shadows, slipping between guards. While Boone was distracted by his prize, Sani was already at the edge of the camp, blade drawn, breath silent. He found Kaya tied to a wagon post. Her eyes went wide when she saw him. He pressed a finger to his lips, then cut the rope with a single motion and lifted her into his arms. On the opposite ridge, Amos Vex had been watching through the scope of his battered Springfield rifle. He'd read May's letter, and he'd made his decision. As Caro turned to gesture to his men, a gunshot split the silence. Clean, sharp, surgical. Caro's second-in-command dropped like a sack of stones. Gunfire erupted. May snapped her shackles and dove behind a wagon. A bullet grazed her shoulder, hot and mean, but she didn't stop. She rolled, grabbed Caro's own pistol from his crate, and turned. Caro charged. She didn't flinch. As he lunged, she sidestepped and slammed the butt of the gun into his temple. He stumbled, right into the path of his own runaway horse, spooked by the chaos. Hooves crashed into his ribs. And then he was still. The Gatling guns, still in crates, never fired a single shot, because the only thing louder than firepower was justice. The sun rose quiet the next morning, no fanfare, no storm, just soft gold spilling over the gorge like the land itself was breathing again. May sat by the ceremonial fire, her arm wrapped in fresh cloth, her face streaked with soot and sweat. Every muscle ached, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that reminded her she was alive, and more than that, she was free. Sani crouched across from her, tending the embers. He hadn't said much since the night before, but he hadn't needed to. The look in his eyes when he found her after the dust cleared said enough. Not gratitude, not pride, respect. Nakai stepped forward, holding a small clay bowl filled with cedar ash. The scent drifted like memory, ancient and grounding. May closed her eyes as the elder dipped 2 fingers into the ash and touched it gently to her forehead. "This name isn't given," Nakai said. "It's earned." The children gathered around, hushed and wide-eyed. "From this moment you are Nita," she continued, "the one who begins again." A beat of silence followed, then soft taps of spear butts on earth. One by one, from each of the warriors in the circle. Even the quietest among them showed reverence, a nod not just to her courage, but to the spirit that led her here. Eno and Kaya stepped forward, holding a firekeeper's sash. It was hand-beaded, marked with 2 interwoven patterns, a rainbird and a rising sun. They wrapped it around her waist like a badge, tying it with hands that had never forgotten how to love, even when the world taught them loss. "I messed up your bead pattern," Nita whispered to Kaya with a crooked smile. "That's okay," Kaya grinned. "You're family now. We can fix it together." Even Amos Vex had stayed. His arm hung in a sling and his coat was gone, replaced by a woven vest gifted by one of the elders. He had offered to leave after the dust settled, unsure if he'd be welcome. But Nakai had only said, "If you regret, you stay. If you hide, you leave." He stayed, and every morning since he'd been teaching the older boys how to aim, not for war, but for protection. He'd started learning Comanche words too, not the easy ones, the hard ones, the ones that didn't exist in English, like the word for a man who chooses honor, not because he was told to, but because he finally saw it. Sani watched all of this from a distance, quiet, still, thoughtful. Later, he approached Nita beneath the blooming desert willow. He didn't offer flowers or fancy promises, just a small bracelet braided from rawhide, carved with 2 clan symbols, Rainbird and Hunter's Eye. He placed it gently in her palm. "It's not a question," he said. "It's a choice." And she smiled, not because she was claimed, but because for the first time she was seen. The heart that chose her. In the old world, love had always come with strings, conditions, deals behind closed doors. In the old world, love looked more like ownership than affection. But here, it was different. Nita sat beside Sani as dusk painted the sky with copper and flame. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The rhythm of the drum in the distance, the heartbeat of the fire ceremony, filled the space between them. She turned the bracelet over in her hand. The symbols etched into the leather weren't fancy, but they held more meaning than any vow ever sworn under a church roof. One was the mark of Sani's clan, the other hers now. She looked at him. "You're not asking for anything," she said. He shook his head. "I'm not a preacher," he said. "I don't give commands." That made her laugh, soft, real, like the first rain on dry leaves. I didn't know I could love someone without losing pieces of myself, she whispered. You didn't, he replied. You found them. Around them, the desert was changing. Rains had come, just as the prophecy said. The valley was waking, wildflowers blooming where only dust had ruled. The creek near the lodge was whispering again. Even the desert willow, long thought dead, had burst into blossom. Nita walked through the village now with her head high, not because she had proven herself to anyone else, but because she'd remembered who she was before the world tried to reshape her. Gone was the girl who once thought obedience was her only weapon. In her place stood a woman who had chosen her own name, her own people, and her own future. Even the children knew it. They followed her like sparks behind a flame. One morning, as the sky turned lavender, Kaya asked, "Are you going to marry Sani?" Nita smiled. "What we have doesn't need a wedding, it needs trust." "But you wear his bracelet." "I do. And not because I was given it, but because I accepted it." Kaya nodded like that made perfect sense, because in the language of this place, actions mattered more than ceremonies. Nita bent down, whispered something in Comanche into Kaya's ear. "What does it mean?" the girl asked. "It means love isn't ownership, it's choosing each other, every single day." And as they walked back toward the fire, the stars began to emerge, one by one, like promises kept. Shelter is given, but home is earned. That night, the fire crackled in the center of the village, casting orange shadows against painted hides. Children circled Nita, eyes wide, faces lit by flames and stories. She sat cross-legged, her firekeeper's sash tied firm around her waist, hands moving gently as she spoke, not loud, not proud, just real. "You know what fear used to mean for me?" she asked them. "It meant silence, obedience. It meant doing what I was told, even when my soul screamed." A few of the children nodded. They knew that scream. "But fear isn't weakness, and courage isn't about fighting," she continued. "It's about refusing to be owned. That's all, just that one thing." They leaned in closer. "I wasn't brave when I ran. I was desperate. I wasn't brave when I stood in chains. I was angry. But I was brave when I chose not to give myself away." The wind shifted. Sparks rose. That's what you have to remember. People might offer you safety, but real shelter comes from those who ask nothing in return. The ones who see you, not what you give. Behind her, Sani stood quietly with the elders. Amos Vex leaned against a post, arms crossed, watching with a rare smile. And the stars, bright and scattered, turned slowly overhead like a wheel that had finally come full circle. "You are not what was taken from you," Nita told them. "You are what you choose to protect, what you choose to love, and who you choose to become." A child handed her a stick to stoke the fire. She stirred it gently, sending sparks flying upward. For a moment, it looked like the sky was full of fireflies. And as the camera of memory pulled back, wide and silent, the voice of the land returned. "Out here, shelter is given, but home is earned."